6 weeks before my wedding, my sister decided her baby shower mattered more than the day I was supposed to become a wife. And on September 21, 2023, my family proved they agreed with her. My parents, my aunts, my cousins, even my father, the man who was supposed to walk me down the aisle, skipped my wedding for her party at the Savannah Yacht Club and left my side of the chapel almost empty. For a while, they acted like what they did was normal, like I was the one who was supposed to understand. Then, years later, my husband painted that wedding day, and the same people who could not bother to show up for me started panicking when the truth would not stay inside the family anymore. I'm Claire Whitaker. I'm 35. I run Whitaker Events, a wedding planning company in Savannah, Georgia. And if you want to understand why one painting shook my family so badly, you need to see the day they finally made it impossible for me to keep pretending they would ever choose me. That morning, in Savannah, Georgia, I was pinning ivory rose heads into a low arrangement beside the guest book because my florist had already left and I could not stop myself from fixing things. That was the problem with being a wedding planner. I had spent the last 7 years building Whitaker events by making sure everyone else got their perfect day. I knew how to calm a nervous bride, how to hide a wine stain under candlelight, how to reroute a late limo without letting the mother of the bride find out. I knew exactly where the late afternoon sun would hit the stained glass at our chapel near Forsyth Park. I knew which aisle runner tape would hold in Georgia humidity. I knew the ceremony music cue down to the second. What I did not know was why the 2 front rows on my side were still empty. At first, I told myself my family was running late. In the South, late can mean 15 minutes, and nobody apologizes for it. My father was habitually late to anything he did not consider urgent. My mother was always waiting on somebody else to finish getting ready. My aunts had a group talent for showing up all at once in a cloud of perfume and excuses. But then the officiant checked his watch for the second time. Maya, my best friend, looked from the chapel door to my face and back again. The string trio had already started the prelude. Ethan was standing at the front in a navy suit, one hand folded over the other, trying to look calm for me. None of my relatives had arrived. Not my father, Robert Whitaker. Not my mother, Diane. Not my older sister, Alexandra. Not one cousin, not one aunt, not even the uncle who once showed up 2 hours early to a backyard barbecue because he got the time wrong. I took my phone from the dressing table and stepped into the side hallway off the chapel, the one with the framed black and white photographs of Savannah from the 1940s. My hands were steady, which scared me more than if they had been shaking. I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice was too careful. That was the first thing I noticed. "Where are you?" There was a pause long enough for me to hear laughter in the background, glasses clinking, a microphone squealing for half a second and then settling. "We are across town." "Across town where?" Another pause. "At Alexandra's shower." For a second, I just stared at the faded wallpaper across from me, pale green vines twisting over cream. Something inside me went quiet. "My wedding is in 10 minutes. "I know, Claire." "If you know, why are you at the yacht club?" "Please don't do this right now." I laughed once, and it did not sound like me. "Do what?" Diane lowered her voice. "Gregory's parents are here. Some of his business partners are here. It would have looked terrible if our side of the family barely showed up." I pressed my fingers against my forehead. "So you all decided my wedding was the event you could skip?" "It is not like that." "It is exactly like that." I heard my mother exhale the way she always did when she was trying to move past something without actually dealing with it. "Alexandra is 8 months pregnant. The timing got complicated. We thought maybe we could make part of both." The chapel clock chimed the quarter hour. "You knew my date for over a year." No answer. That was my answer. I ended the call before she could soften it into something smaller than it was. When I turned around, Maya was standing at the end of the hallway in a teal dress, with one hand braced against the doorframe. She did not ask what happened. She could read it on my face. "They're not coming." I nodded. "They're at Alexandra's shower." Maya closed her eyes for a second. "Of course they are." There are moments when your whole life rearranges itself in your mind, and nothing outwardly dramatic happens. No one collapses, no one screams. A string trio keeps playing somewhere down the hall. A florist's ribbon flutters under the air vent. Somebody laughs outside on the front steps. I had known for years that Alexandra was the center of gravity in our family. She was older, louder, harder to please. She wanted attention the way some people need oxygen. If she was upset, the whole house felt it. If she wanted something, every plan bent around her until she got it. I was the easier daughter, the reasonable one, the one people praised for understanding. In the Whitaker family, understanding meant stepping aside and making it look graceful. Maya came closer and put both hands on my arms. People who expect you to sacrifice your happiness will keep expecting it forever. I swallowed hard. I really thought my dad would come. I know. Ethan appeared in the doorway a moment later. His expression changed the instant he saw my face. "What happened?" "They're at Alexandra's shower." He did not say anything for a beat. Then he stepped fully into the hallway and took my free hand. "We can stop. We can walk out of here and get in the car, and nobody gets to tell you what to do next." I looked at him. Really looked at him. Ethan Cole, 37 years old, paint under his nails half the time, kind eyes, steady voice. My family had spent 3 years talking about his career like it was a phase, like talent only counted if it came with a salary they could brag about over dinner. Behind him, I could hear our guests settling into the pews. "No." I put my phone down on the table beside the guest book. "We're getting married." The walk down the aisle was not the one I had imagined as a little girl. My father was not there to take my arm. My mother was not dabbing her eyes in the front pew. The row where my family should have been was a line of empty wood and white programs. Maya walked beside me instead. The doors opened. Music lifted. Ethan looked at me like the room was full. And somehow that kept me upright. The ceremony itself passed in flashes. Warm light over the chapel floor, my bouquet trembling once in my hand, Ethan's thumb brushing my knuckles during the vows, the officiant asking questions I answered with a voice that sounded calm and clear. When it was done, our guests clapped with the kind of sincerity that almost broke me more than silence would have. Outside the chapel, while photographs were being organized in little clusters, an older man in a linen jacket approached Ethan. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, Charleston accent softened by age. "Samuel Hartman." He offered Ethan his hand first, then turned to me. "Congratulations to both of you." Ethan seemed surprised. "Thank you for coming." Samuel gave a small smile. "I would not have missed it." There was something in the way he said it that made me look at him twice, but before I could ask anything more, he stepped back toward the courtyard. "I'll let you get back to your day." He left as quietly as he had appeared. That evening, after the last flower had been packed away and the last polite smile had fallen from my face, Ethan and I got into the car for the drive to the airport hotel before our early flight to Sonoma County. Savannah slid past the windows in gold and shadow, the squares, the oaks, the city where my family still lived as if nothing had happened. I watched it disappear behind us and understood something with a clarity that hurt. For the first time in my life, I had stopped waiting for my family to choose me. The first morning in Sonoma County, I woke up before Ethan and reached for my phone before my eyes were fully open. The room was still blue with early light. We had left the curtains cracked the night before, and a pale stripe of sun lay across the opposite wall. Ethan was asleep on his side, one arm bent under the pillow, breathing slow and even, like his body had already accepted a peace mine had not caught up to yet. I checked my messages. Nothing from my father, nothing from my mother, nothing from Alexandra. I set the phone down, picked it up again, and opened Instagram like I had no control over my own hands. The first image that filled the screen was a table at the Savannah Yacht Club covered in blush flowers and white linen, with my sister in the center of it wearing a fitted blue dress and one hand under the curve of her stomach. Behind her were my mother, two of my aunts, and three cousins, smiling like they were posing for a family Christmas card. Nobody looked like they had missed anything. I locked the screen and put the phone face down on the nightstand. Outside, Sonoma was quiet in a way Savannah never is. Even the air felt different, dry, cool in the mornings. We could see a stretch of vineyard from the small inn where we were staying, rows of vines running down a slope in clean lines that looked almost painted from a distance. It was beautiful in the way places are when they have no idea what you brought with you. Ethan stirred and blinked at me. "You okay?" I gave him the kind of smile women learn when they do not want to ruin a moment for someone else. "I'm working on it." He sat up, rubbed his face, and reached for my hand without another question. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He never mistook silence for indifference. He knew sometimes silence was just pain trying not to spill all over the room. For the first 2 days, I kept checking my phone at intervals I pretended were random. Before breakfast, in the car between wineries, while Ethan paid for coffee, before bed. Every time I looked, I told myself I was only confirming what I already knew. No one was coming after me. My mother finally texted on the 3rd day while Ethan and I were standing outside a tasting room near Glen Ellen. The message was short enough to fit on one screen. "Sorry things got complicated. Alexandra is very far along, and the timing got difficult. We never wanted your day to feel overshadowed." I read it twice, then a 3rd time. Not one word in it was an apology. It was a press release in the language of motherhood. Ethan was leaning against the hood of the rental car, sunglasses on, waiting for me to finish reading. I walked over and held the phone out. He read it and handed it back. That is not an apology. No. It sounds like she wants credit for not saying something worse. I laughed under my breath, and this time it felt closer to real. That does sound like my mother. We drove for a while after that, with the windows cracked and no music on. The hills rolled past in dusty green and gold, and every now and then I would see a farmhouse in the distance and think about how strange it was that the world could go on being lovely while your life reorganized itself around an absence. Maya called that afternoon. I was alone out on the inn's back patio, my shoes off, a glass of iced tea sweating onto the table beside me. Ethan had gone inside to shower before dinner. "How are you really?" I let out a breath. I think I'm still waiting for somebody to act like what happened was insane. It was insane. I know that. You know that. My family seems committed to pretending they just had a scheduling issue. Maya made a quiet sound in the back of her throat. Families that avoid conflict always make the quieter child pay for the peace. That landed harder than I expected. Maya had known me since Chapel Hill. We met freshman year at UNC when I was 18 and she was 19, and both of us were pretending not to be homesick. She had watched me go home for holidays and come back with the same polished explanations every time. Alexandra was stressed, Dad was tired, Mom was doing her best. Nobody meant anything by it. Maya had listened to all of it for 17 years. They keep picking her because she makes the bigger mess if they don't. Exactly. I really thought my parents would draw the line at my wedding. I know. Her voice softened. But Claire, Some people do not change when the stakes get higher. They just reveal themselves faster. After we hung up, I sat there a while with my phone in my lap and looked out over the vines until the light shifted. Somewhere inside the inn, a door closed. Glasses clinked in the dining room. A couple laughed near the front steps. When Ethan came back outside, his hair was still damp from the shower and he had changed into a clean button-down. He looked at me once and sat down without asking whether I wanted to talk. "I do," I said. He waited. "Tell me the part you usually skip." "The part about what?" "The years you almost quit." He looked down at his hands for a second, then leaned back in the chair. "I graduated from SCAD in 2010 thinking talent was going to matter more than timing." I smiled a little. "That does sound like a 24-year-old. "It really does." He rested his forearms on his knees. "The first few years weren't terrible because I was still convinced the next thing would happen soon. Group shows, little commissions, a couple good reviews nobody read. Then by 2018, I was 32 and still patching together freelance design work to pay rent." He looked out toward the vineyard. "By 2020, I started wondering if maybe everybody in your family was right, and I was just dressing failure as integrity." I turned toward him. "I never thought that." "I know." He smiled once, tired and grateful all at once. "That was kind of the problem. You believed in me when I had stopped being able to do it consistently for myself." He told me about gallery meetings that had gone to nowhere, about collectors who liked his work but wanted something less personal, about the years between 2018 and 2022 when he took branding projects and packaging layouts just to stay afloat, then came home too drained to paint the things he actually cared about. "Samuel Hartman didn't save me," he said. "He just noticed I kept working." As if his name had opened a door, Ethan's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and handed it to me. It was an email from Samuel. Short, direct. He said he had first seen Ethan's work at a small exhibition in Atlanta in 2021 and had been quietly following it since. He did not talk about money or promises. He said he knew a few curators and collectors who might respond to the discipline in Ethan's work, and if Ethan was interested, he would be happy to make a couple of introductions after we got back from California. I handed the phone back. "That doesn't sound random." "No." "You think he came to the wedding because of you?" Ethan considered that. "I think he came because he wanted to see what kind of people we were." That night at dinner, 2 tables over, I heard a couple from San Francisco talking about a delayed real estate project somewhere on the Georgia coast. The husband mentioned permitting issues and financing getting sticky when timelines slipped. I barely paid attention until he said the developer's last name, Brooks. I did not turn around. I did not need more than that to feel a small shift somewhere in the back of my mind. Not satisfaction, not yet. Just recognition that the world outside my family had its own weather, and not all of it could be controlled by polished photos and club memberships. Later, back in our room, I took my mother's message out again and read it one last time. "Sorry things got complicated." I stared at those words until they went flat and meaningless. Then I deleted the thread. Not because it did not matter, because it did. Because I was finally beginning to understand that there was a difference between being loved and being managed, a difference between family and access, a difference between forgiveness and making myself easy to overlook. Ethan was already in bed reading when I turned off the lamp and got under the covers beside him. "You okay?" This time I did not give him the practiced smile. "I think I am done waiting." He closed the book and set it on the nightstand. Done waiting for what? For them to feel bad enough to tell the truth. He reached over and laced his fingers through mine under the blanket. Outside, the vineyard had gone dark. The window reflected the room back at us, 2 quiet figures in borrowed light, building something I had spent too many years trying to get somewhere else. I lay there listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner and made a decision that felt less like anger than clarity. When we went back to Savannah, I was not going to spend one more day arranging my life around the hope that my family might finally become who I had always needed them to be. When we got back to Savannah, I stopped making myself available by default. That was the first change, and on the surface, it was a small one. I answered emails during business hours instead of whenever they came in. I stopped saying yes before I had even checked my calendar. I turned down weddings that wanted miracles on budgets that barely covered folding chairs. I took Whitaker events off autopilot and started running it like a business instead of an extension of my personality. It felt strange at first, almost rude. For most of my life, usefulness had been my safest role. If I was helpful enough, calm enough, easy enough, then maybe people would mistake that for value. Maybe they would keep me close. Maybe they would choose me. By January 2024, I was beginning to understand that being easy to need was not the same thing as being loved. Savannah looked different after the wedding, though I knew that was more about me than the city. The squares were still beautiful. The river still moved under that flat gray winter light. Tourists still lined up for pralines and carriage rides and ghost tours. But everywhere I went, there were reminders that my family was still here, still moving through the same world as if nothing had happened. I saw my mother once in the produce section at Publix on Abercorn. She froze for half a second when she noticed me, then smiled too brightly and asked how married life was. I said it was good. She said that was wonderful. We stood next to a display of oranges, talking about nothing for less than a minute. She never mentioned the wedding. That was when I realized avoidance could be as deliberate as cruelty. By February, I had settled into a new routine. I met clients in the mornings. I spent afternoons on design boards, budgets, linen samples, seating diagrams. I came home smelling like candle wax, printer ink, and fresh flowers. Ethan worked in the back room we had turned into a studio, painting between freelance design jobs that actually paid the bills. Some weeks he was building brand mock-ups for small businesses. Some weeks he was touching up restaurant menus or illustrating packaging drafts for agencies that wanted something custom but not too original. The design work kept us afloat. The painting kept him himself. One rainy Tuesday in early March, my mother called while I was finalizing a spring wedding timeline at my desk. I stared at her name on the screen until it nearly stopped ringing, then answered, "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice had that smooth, careful tone she used when she wanted something and had already decided not to acknowledge the price of asking. "Hi, Mom. I wanted to ask you something." Of course she did. She explained that Gregory was helping host a charity fundraiser in May for a coastal preservation initiative tied to a few of his business associates. The planning committee was overwhelmed. The event needed structure, vendor management, and someone with taste. Someone with taste. Someone, apparently, like me. She said all of this without once mentioning September 21. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the office window at the wet parking lot below. Cars moved through the rain in silver lines. "I can't do it." She paused. "What do you mean, you can't?" "I mean I'm not available." "Claire, it's only one evening." It was never only one evening. It was strategy calls, spreadsheets, layout revisions, menu tastings, vendor emergencies, and me smiling through it all while people like Gregory Brooks got the credit for hosting something seamless. "I'm not available." Another silence. Then, carefully, "Is this because of the wedding?" I let that sit between us. "It is because you are asking me for labor while pretending nothing happened." My mother drew in a breath like I had slapped her. "You know how complicated that time was." "No, you know how convenient it was for everyone except me." The room went very still around me. Rain against glass, a printer starting up in the front office, my own pulse, steady now. I hope the fundraiser goes well, but you need to find someone else. I ended the call before she could turn my refusal into a debate. For about 10 seconds, I sat there staring at the dark screen in my hand, waiting for guilt to flood in the way it always used to. It came, but thinner than before. Behind it was something else. Relief. Boundary was not a feeling I had been taught to recognize as healthy. In my body, it felt sharp and unfamiliar, like wearing a new pair of shoes that had not softened yet. But it also felt clean, like a locked door in a storm. That night, I told Ethan what had happened while he was rinsing paint from a jar in the kitchen sink. "You said no." "I did." He turned, smiling a little. "And the sky didn't fall?" "Not yet." "It probably won't." He dried his hands and came over to kiss my forehead. "I am proud of you." No one in my family had ever said that to me after I chose myself over their convenience. Spring moved in. Azaleas lit up half the city. Wedding season picked up. Ethan kept painting and taking whatever design work came in. Every couple of weeks, Samuel Hartman called or sent an email with the name of a collector in Charleston, a curator in Asheville, a gallery owner in Atlanta who might be worth meeting. He never oversold anything. He just kept opening small doors and letting Ethan decide whether to walk through. In late April, Samuel invited us to a small gathering in Charleston, where Ethan met Daniel Reyes, a gallery director from Atlanta. Daniel was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a kind of clipped focus that made you feel he was always editing the room in real time. He looked through photos of Ethan's recent work on a tablet for a long minute before handing it back. "There's discipline here." Ethan thanked him and waited. Daniel glanced at Samuel, then back at Ethan. "Discipline isn't the same as a show. I need to know whether you can build a body of work that speaks to itself." On the drive back to Savannah, Ethan kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the gear shift. He looked calm, but I knew him well enough to read the current under that calm. "You hate vague people." "I really do." "But?" He gave a short laugh. But he didn't say no. He started working with a different intensity after that. Not frantic, not desperate, more focused, as if somebody had finally named the standard clearly enough for him to reach towards it. Around the same time, little pieces of news about Gregory Brooks began surfacing in the local business world. Nothing dramatic, nothing front page, just the kind of talk that moved through Savannah dinner parties and boardrooms before it reached the newspaper. One of Brooks's coastal development's resort projects farther down the coast had stalled. Permitting delays, financing pressure, environmental review taking longer than expected. The kind of problems Gregory would once have brushed off over cocktails now seemed to linger a little too long in conversation. Alexandra, meanwhile, kept posting polished photos online, brunches, nursery updates, smiling at the yacht club in white and pale blue, perfection with good lighting. But by summer, even I could see the edges tightening. Ethan painted through all of it. Late nights, early mornings, music low in the studio, canvases leaning against the walls in different stages of becoming. He was building something, though neither of us knew yet what shape it would finally take. Then, in November 2024, I came home from a venue walkthrough and found him standing in the studio with his hands on his hips, staring at a canvas taller than I was. I stopped in the doorway. The bride in the painting stood alone at the front of a chapel. Light fell across the aisle. The pews behind her were lined with white programs and empty seats. Not empty in a general way, empty in the exact way absence has weight when it belongs to people who should have been there. I knew the room. I knew the angle of the light. I knew the wound inside it. "Ethan." He looked over at me,
tired and uncertain in a way that made him seem younger for a second. I didn't know if I was done with it. I stepped closer until I was standing right in front of the canvas. What did you call it? He waited a beat. September 21st. The air left my lungs slowly. Not because I was surprised, because some part of me had known this was coming before he did. He had painted many things in the years I had known him: city corners after rain, women on apartment balconies, men sitting alone in diners with their coffee gone cold. But this was the first time I had seen him put our life on canvas without disguising it as anything else. "It hurts to look at," I said. He nodded once. "I know." I looked at the bride again, small in the frame, but not fragile, alone, but upright. It also tells the truth. A week later, Ethan photographed the finished painting along with the others in the new series and sent them to Daniel Reyes in Atlanta. 3 days after that, an email came in just after breakfast. Daniel wanted to see the full body of work in person. He was not promising anything yet, but he was interested enough to keep the conversation going. Ethan read the message twice, then set his phone down on the kitchen table and looked at me with something dangerously close to hope. And for the first time since the wedding, hope did not feel like a thing that belonged only to other people.
By the time Ethan and I sat down for dinner after the opening reception in Atlanta, my feet were throbbing, my head was buzzing, and I still had not caught up to the fact that the room had been full for most of the night. Daniel Reyes had taken a chance on Ethan in spring 2025 and given him his first solo exhibition at the gallery in the West Side Arts District. For weeks, the show had lived in our apartment as shipping crates, inventory lists, garment bags, and the low, constant hum of nerves. Then suddenly, it was real. White walls, spotlights, price lists, quiet conversations breaking open in front of canvases Ethan had built one brushstroke at a time in our spare room. We were at a restaurant a few blocks from the gallery, the kind of place with brick walls and low pendant lights, and a menu that sounded more confident than anyone sitting at our table. Daniel had gone. Samuel Hartman was still with us, nursing a bourbon and looking more pleased than he would ever admit out loud. Ethan had loosened his tie, but still looked like he was braced for somebody to take the whole evening back. "You can unclench now," Samuel told him. Ethan let out a laugh. "I am trying. You sold 3 pieces before 7:30. "I know." "You know in theory," Samuel said. "Your face says otherwise." I sat back and watched the two of them for a second. There was something strangely moving about Samuel, 72 years old and impossible to impress, choosing to be proud in such a measured, dignified way. He never gushed, he never oversold, but he had brought collectors into that room tonight who mattered, and they had stayed. At the center of the gallery, in the position nobody could avoid, was September 21st. People had stood in front of it longer than any other painting in the room. Some crossed their arms and stared, some leaned in close to the chapel pews in the background, as if they were trying to count the absences. One woman covered her mouth for half a second and then stepped back like the painting had said something to her she had not been ready to hear in public. Daniel introduced the series carefully. He called it an examination of emotional absence and private rituals. He never said wedding, he never said family, but he did not need to. The painting told the truth with or without labels. Back at the hotel that night, Ethan checked his email before taking off his jacket. "There is a message from an editor at Hudson Review." I looked up from the bed. "What kind of message?" "They want a few comments about the show." By the time we drove back to Savannah 2 days later, the review was live. I read it in the passenger seat while Ethan drove south on I-16, one hand steady on the wheel. The writer described Ethan's work as disciplined, intimate, and emotionally unsparing,
Then she spent half the article on September 21st. She called it a portrait of quiet family betrayal. She wrote that the painting carried the unmistakable pressure of lived experience. She mentioned, almost casually, that the work appeared rooted in a real wedding day in which the bride was left facing rows of family seats that should have been full. I lowered the phone slowly. They put the backstory in. Ethan glanced at me and then back at the road. Enough of it to make people curious. That was the beginning, not the review by itself, not the exhibition by itself. The beginning was the combination of public attention and a story people could suddenly attach to a face. The next Saturday, we drove to Tybee Island for the day because Savannah felt too close and too full of itself. We walked the beach, ate fried shrimp at a place near the water, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself enjoy the simple fact of being somewhere with Ethan that had nothing to do with vendors or galleries or family damage. Late that afternoon, I posted one photo.
Nothing strategic, just Ethan and me standing barefoot near the dunes, both of us squinting into the sun, his arm around my shoulders. No caption beyond a date and a heart. I put my phone back in my bag and forgot about it until dinner. We were halfway through a basket of hush puppies when it began buzzing against the table. Then again, then again. I pulled it out and stared. My mother, a cousin from Hilton Head, an aunt I had not heard from since Christmas 2022, my father. Maya texted almost immediately. Do not answer anybody until you know what is happening. Ethan was already reaching for his own phone. What do you have? I started scrolling. Voicemails, missed calls, a message from my mother that opened with, "We need to talk," a text from one of my cousins saying she had just seen the article and had no idea, another from an aunt telling me she was so proud of Ethan and had always known he was talented, which would have been funny if it had not made me feel cold all over. Ethan looked up from his screen. I got one from Gregory. I held out my hand, and he gave me the phone. The message was polished, almost cheerful. Would love to connect when you were back in town. I may have a great opportunity for an installation in one of our luxury condo developments. Proud of you, man. I handed the phone back. He cannot be serious. Oh, he is. My own phone rang again. This time it was Alexandra. I stared at her name until it stopped. A minute later, another text came through from my mother. People are talking in Savannah. Please call me. There it was. Not, are you okay? Not, I am sorry. Not, we were wrong. People are talking. That same night, Maya called while we were walking back to the car under a row of old live oaks near the restaurant parking lot. The air smelled like salt and fryer oil and wet wood. It is everywhere. What does that mean? It means women in pearls at charity lunches are suddenly art critics. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Tell me. The review got shared around. Somebody connected the date in the title to your wedding, then your beach photo went up, then half of Savannah started doing the math. I leaned against the passenger side door and closed my eyes for a second. What is Alexandra saying? Depends who she is talking to. That tracked. And Gregory? Trying to act above it, which usually means he is not. When I got home later that night, I sat on the edge of the bed in our apartment and looked at my phone again. 23 missed calls, 9 voicemails, more texts than I wanted to count. The same people who had treated my wedding like a scheduling conflict were suddenly urgent, suddenly emotional, suddenly available. Ethan came out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, and paused when he saw my face. You do not have to deal with any of it tonight. I nodded, but I did not put the phone down right away. Something had shifted. I could feel it as clearly as a weather change.
The balance that had always favored my sister, my parents, their version of events, their polished explanations, had tilted. Not all the way, not yet, but enough that for the first time they were no longer calling to be forgiven. They were calling because they were afraid of what the truth sounded like once other people could hear it too.
By early 2026, my life had become quiet in the way I used to think only happened to other people. Whitaker Events was steady, not glamorous, not viral, not the kind of business anybody in Savannah would describe at a country club luncheon with raised eyebrows and admiration, but solid. I had a calendar full of spring weddings, a team I trusted on contract weekends, and clients who hired me because they wanted someone calm when things got hard. Ethan was still painting, Samuel Hartman still called every few weeks, always sounding mildly annoyed by the world in a way that somehow passed for affection. Maya came down from Atlanta when she could, and still had a talent for walking into a room and making every weak excuse sound exactly as weak as it was. For the first time in my adult life, peace did not feel temporary. It felt built. That was around the same time Brooks Coastal Development filed for Chapter 11. The news broke on a Thursday morning in February. I found out because one of my brides texted to ask if I had seen the business section yet. I opened the article while standing in my kitchen in socks, holding a coffee mug I had not even taken a sip from. The language was as dry as all corporate disasters are on paper. Financing withdrawn, projects delayed, restructuring, investor uncertainty. But between the lines, it said what everybody in Savannah would understand instantly. Gregory Brooks was no longer untouchable. By that weekend, the city had already begun doing what cities like Savannah do best. They were pretending not to gossip while turning someone else's collapse into social weather. People who had once angled for invitations were suddenly unavailable. Investors who used to linger over handshakes were keeping a safer distance. The polished image Alexandra had worked so hard to live inside had started to crack, and once that happened, everyone claimed they had noticed the fault lines all along. I did not celebrate. I also did not feel sorry for them in the way I used to feel sorry for everyone who made life harder for me. One Monday morning, my father called and asked if I would meet him for coffee. Not at the house, not with my mother there to smooth the edges, just coffee. I agreed because by then I was curious what truth sounded like in his voice when there was no one around to protect him from it. We met at a place near Monterey Square that had mismatched mugs and terrible lighting, and the kind of cinnamon scones people kept ordering because they wanted them to be better than they were. My father looked older than the last time I had really looked at him. Not just older in years, smaller somehow. Less sure that the world would keep arranging itself around whatever he preferred not to face. He stood when I walked in. We hugged briefly, awkwardly, like people who knew each other well and not at all. When we sat down, he wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and stared at the table for a moment. I saw Ethan's painting in person. I waited. I drove to Atlanta 2 weeks after the article came out. That surprised me enough that I did not respond right away. I stood in front of it for a long time, he said, long enough that I started to understand something I should have understood without a painting. He finally looked up at me. I kept seeing those empty seats. The room around us carried on, milk steaming behind the counter, silverware clinking into a bus tub, a woman near the window laughing too loudly at something on her phone. My father cleared his throat. I told myself for years that keeping peace in the family meant giving Alexandra what she wanted before she made everything harder. I could hear it now, the sentence underneath the sentence. Not peace, ease. Not fairness, convenience. You were easier, he said quietly. You were kinder. I used that against you. There it was.
Not a justification, not a polished version, just the truth. I looked down at my hands for a second, then back at him. The wedding was the moment I stopped not knowing. He nodded once. I know. I don't think you do, not completely. His face changed at that, not in anger, just in recognition that he could not ask me to make this easier for him either. I am right. I let the silence stay. He had spent most of my life filling silence with explanations. This one belonged to me. Finally, I said, "Some moments don't come back. You don't get to miss your daughter's wedding and then circle back later when life feels less complicated." He flinched, but he did not argue. I know. That was all he said. No defense of my mother, no attempt to blame Alexandra, no request that I fix his guilt by calling it enough. When we stood to leave, he looked like he wanted to say something else and then decided against it. I was grateful for that restraint, more than I could explain. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail, from Alexandra. Not a text, not an email, a real letter on heavy cream stationery, with her name embossed at the top in the style she used for thank you notes and baby announcements and all the small formal performances of a woman who wanted every feeling to come with good paper. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it slowly. Her handwriting had not changed since high school, still angular, still trying too hard to look effortless.
She did not apologize the way people imagine apologies happen in movies. There was no clean confession followed by tears I could not see. It was Alexandra, which meant the truth arrived braided with self-protection. She wrote that she had always assumed I would understand. She wrote that she knew I would not make a scene. She wrote that somewhere along the way, she had come to believe my role in the family was to absorb discomfort, so the rest of them did not have to. One line sat heavier than the others. "I never really believed you would choose yourself over us." I read that sentence 4 times. Then I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, not because I needed the last word, but because for the first time in my life, I understood that not every truth required my immediate response. That Sunday, Maya came down from Atlanta and Samuel came over in the afternoon. Ethan grilled chicken in the backyard while I set out potato salad and a loaf of bread from the bakery near Bull Street. It was not a holiday. Nobody had dressed up. Samuel brought wine that he pretended not to care about, and Maya brought a pie she claimed she had not had time to make from scratch, which was how we all knew she had. At one point, I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing plates, while the 3 of them argued gently about whether a painting should ever explain itself, and I had one of those strange, still moments where you realize the life you needed did not arrive all at once. It arrived piece by piece, every time somebody showed up and meant it. Ethan came up behind me and set his chin briefly on my shoulder. "You disappeared." "I'm right here." "Good." I dried my hands and turned to look at the table, Maya laughing with her whole face, Samuel pretending not to smile, Ethan moving through our kitchen like he belonged there, because he did. For so long, I thought justice would have to look dramatic to count. Public humiliation, a perfect apology, some cinematic moment where everyone who hurt me finally understood exactly how wrong they had been. But revenge never actually happened. I did not ruin my sister's marriage. I did not expose Gregory. I did not make my parents sit inside my pain until they could recite it back to me in full. I just stopped sacrificing my life to protect their version of family. And in the end, that changed everything. If you have ever had to set a boundary with people you love, I would really like to know whether you were able to forgive them without going back to who you used to be.